Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash 63 with Michael Jimerson from Free Market, Environmentalism, and Green Agorism and DIY Anarchy. Fame is coming your way. We're talking about Virginia, Boogaloo, all kinds of fun stuff. And before we get into it, we have a special offer for our listeners from friend of the show, author and content creator Shane Radliff of Liberty Under Attack Publications. Take 10% off your order by using coupon code DANK10. That's DANK10. Just go to libertyunderattack.com. They've got books focusing on self-liberation, freedom strategy, solutions, and more. Current books, #Agora, Second Realm book on strategy, Ben Stone's Sedition, Subversion, and Sabotage, and Shane's very own Vanu, A Strategy for Self-Liberation. Lots of strategies in there. You can also pick up Wildfire, a thriller by Matt Wotecki. Just had him on the show the other day. Go back and check that out. Also, shout out to Bad Moon Hemp. Check out badmoonhemp.wordpress.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your handmade hemp needs. I use their beard oil and beard balm. You can see that in the videos if you're watching on YouTube. It makes my beard look good. One more shout out to friend of the show, former guest Shane Hunter, aka the Abrasive Entrepreneur. Get yourself over to abrasiveads.com and opt in for a free first training from the man himself on Maslow's hierarchy of needs tied into marketing. This is valuable stuff. You can't go without it if you're looking to market your content. That's abrasiveads.com.
Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Podstash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Check out thedankpodstash.com to find every episode of the Dank Podstash, links to support the show via our BitBacker and Patreon, Dank Podstash merchandise, and much more. If you'd like to advertise on the Dank Podstash, email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com.
Zombie presidents! What anarchy! Zombie presidents!
Back again with Michael Jimerson. It's been a while, man. We talk pretty regularly, but this has been a while since you've been on the show. We're going to talk about some new shit today, huh?
Well, it's great to be back.
Hell yeah. Great to have you back. The hot topic of, the last couple of weeks. It's been the Boogaloo for a while, but specifically Virginia. I know you're over in the east, kind of close to there, so you have a little more insight. Not in Virginia. Hopefully I can get somebody from Virginia like we were talking about at some point, if they don't cut the power and do all that bullshit over there and start trying to take guns. But it's interesting, huh?
Well, I guess interesting is a very nice way of putting it, but like I've mentioned before, we really won't know until something actually happens.
Right. Well, let's try to lay out exactly what is going on over there. I guess the Virginia governor is Ralph Northam. He's a Democrat, and the Democratic Party just won a huge, they're a majority now, I guess. This is in November's state elections. And so he's now pushing for gun bans, gun control measures, red flag laws, and they're trying to ban self-defense, meeting up for self-defense, for shooting guns, even all the way down to martial arts, from what I've heard.
Yeah, that's what I've heard also. I know this whole area is pretty blue, but from my understanding, Virginia is actually pretty red, just controlled by 2 or 3 blue cities. Virginia is historically a pretty gun-friendly state, pretty traditionally Southern state. So then the Democrats are, as you said, the state election last month, they're going to be taking control next month, and they're they want to enact measures that are traditionally against what the people of Virginia have been for. So, they got in office somehow, but, we all know how the voting process actually does.
Right.
So, I know, like, here in Maryland, it's been traditionally a very anti-gun state. But surprisingly enough, there hasn't been the extreme measures called for here that I'm aware of that have been recently called for in Virginia. I mean, we do have a Republican governor, which he has done some good. Like his first act in office was repealing a storm tax that was enacted by the previous Democratic governor. But at the same time, he was also in office when the school shootings happened here, and is the reason why Maryland is now a red flag law state.
Right. And there's red flag laws. Like we hear about most of the red flag incidents, I guess, over on the East Coast, but there's red flag laws in a lot of states that a lot of people are not aware of, it seems. It doesn't seem like people have been taking extreme measures with these red flag laws in the West as much as they have out East.
Well, I think a lot of it may be at least peripherally relate to the fact that just the population density alone is a lot more congested, east of the Mississippi. You also find, short of like the West Coast I previously mentioned, you find a lot more blue states here out in the East Coast because it's been occupied and populated a lot longer, a lot more time for the politics and all the bullshit to set in and become normal for people. So, I mean, I couldn't say exactly what states have the red flag laws, but I think you're right. I think it is more concentrated here on the east than out west.
Yeah. And as far as you were mentioning with a couple blue counties kind of controlling the state of Virginia, that seems to be a problem and the norm in a lot of places. I know here in Washington, that's same kind of thing. The officials, the government crooks in King County have proposed different gun laws and whatnot, and same as Virginia, the sheriffs over here on the east side of Washington have claimed that they won't enforce them. And like we say, only time will tell.
Well, we've actually, since I think I got out of the military in 2013, and that's when I really started paying attention to all that bullshit, is we've had a lot of laws enacted increasing gun control and all that, especially during the Obama administration. And we've had some the eastern shore on the east of the Chesapeake, which is a lot more red than the rest of the state. We've had some sheriffs there say the same thing, but given what I know about the geopolitical situation here, he may or may not be sincere in what he says, but reality I think will be far different, and I think the same thing applies to Virginia.
What do you think that reality is, or could be?
Well, it could be several different things. Like in the case of the Adjutant General of the Virginia State Army National Guard, he basically, in his statement, said, we're not going to do anything unless told to. At least that's how the article and what he said shows. What will actually happen, in my opinion, maybe they will be ordered to, and if they are ordered to, they will comply, at least at the officer level.
Right. And with that, you're referring to, it says here, Major General Timothy P. Williams. And yeah, there's a whole statement. I'll link all the articles that we're referencing in the description so that everybody can read these. But I was having a conversation with you about this, as well as Hot Toke's co-host Daniel Johnson, and you guys had very different takes on what exactly Major General Williams meant about, or with his statement. It seemed like a career kind of saving statement, so that he didn't have to condemn or endorse right away. But you had a little bit of a different perspective on that. Maybe he was leaving himself open.
Well, you also have to take into consideration the existence of the reason behind the existence of the State National Guard, the laws governing the usage of the National Guard compared to active duty and all that. Is historically and legally, the State National Guard is under the direct control of the respective state governors. And unlike active duty, military is allowed to be used in a law enforcement capacity, as we've all seen in places like Kent State back in the day.
Louisiana.
I know That's another one. I cannot remember the details. I haven't had the opportunity to reference them, but I remember back in 2014 when the Bundy Ranch siege happened. If I remember, I think it was Senator Reid had ordered, or somebody had ordered the governor of Nevada to mobilize the state National Guard in support of the BLM forces at Bundy Ranch, but I think he refused. So it depends on, I guess, the location and the politics and who's actually in charge of the state and what they're willing to do and what not willing to do. So I think in Virginia, it was the governor. The governor is the one that wanted all these new anti-gun laws enacted, but I think it was a congressman who's the one that said, "Hey, let's use the National Guard to support what the governor wants." So, and then in regards to what you're saying with the major general in charge of the state National Guard, it can be interpreted in a few different ways. On one hand, it's like the same thing as an apology, non-apology. He's basically saying he's going to without saying he's going to. But on the other hand, it's also like going back to the existence of the National Guard. Traditionally, they were seen in each respective state as more for the people than even active duty were, because of, it's only twice a month in the summer. But at the same time, on the other hand, we have seen, like with Louisiana and in Ohio, them being used against the people. So it could literally go either way.
Right, and you're correct that it was Democratic Congressman Donald McEachin who was making comments about using the National Guard to enforce the governor's proposed laws. So that's a good point there. So yeah, whatever it is, it's a clusterfuck. And I know just a couple of people in Virginia that I've been talking to that are not feeling great about it. Hopefully one of them I can get on the show in January, like I said, but just a whole lot of stress. And I can understand that completely. If the threats were this serious where I'm at, I'd be more stressed out than I am now, just living under the state in general.
Well, part of the issue is the proximity to Washington, D.C. Virginia is a much larger state than Maryland is, and Northern Virginia, Nova, is considered by some people outside the area and in Virginia to be a separate entity than the larger part of Virginia, because DC is smack dab in the middle of Northern Virginia and Maryland, and this whole area is just blue garbage. There's a very heavy police presence on a daily basis for my work. And I work in some of my job sites take me in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. I see up to a half a dozen different agencies from city up to federal, and that's not counting the individual police I see on a regular basis. And I can understand if people in the larger, more red portion of Virginia becoming a little bit more nervous than usual about that, because from my understanding, the majority of Virginia has always been a little annoyed, so to speak, at Northern Virginia's dictation of policies for the entire state. And I think that's very similar in this situation too. I mean, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not actually from or lived in Virginia. That's just from my understanding from the outside looking in.
Sure. Yeah, well, it seems like there's just a lot of back and forth. I got a plethora of articles open here that I found as these different things were coming to light. And so one of the first responses when it came out that the governor wants to, enact this kind of gun control in the state was people starting Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions in, I believe it's up to over 75 counties now is what it says. And then, like we said, the sheriffs and other law enforcement claiming that they won't enforce it. And the clapback from that, from the Democratic officials in Virginia, they say that law enforcement supporting the resolutions will face consequences if they don't carry out any law the state legislature passes. And this is the quote from them: "The law is the law. If that becomes the law, you don't have a choice, not if you're a sworn officer of the law." And they're threatening removal of law enforcement, or at least immediate termination from their positions if they decide not to enforce the law. So it's kind of funny because these are your boots on the ground, right? If you're the people in Virginia, the government who want to take guns from people and pass this legislature is your law enforcement. And now you're threatening to just make them not law enforcement anymore. So I guess that's where National Guard comes in. It's just a whole cluster. And I'd like to see these law enforcement quit to actually exercise their conscience for once, but I think that might be a pipe dream too.
We have to consider the possibility that some of these more vocal rural sheriffs may be some of the only ones, if at all, that might quit over this resolution if it passes.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of police, well, in regards to being a cop, obviously I've never been one, but being a veteran, a lot of military and police have like this so-called brotherhood, and it's the same way in the military. And even just being a regular civilian in an engineering job, I've noticed a lot of people willing to put up with a lot of bullshit for the sake of a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing can be applied in this case, and even more so with the cops because of that rule of law and the brotherhood and all that. So I think that, for lack of better words, it was smart on the government's part in Virginia to enact something like that. It basically guarantees cooperation while they utilize them for these purposes. Obviously, it makes it more difficult for us. So, like before, we'll just have to wait and see what actually happens.
Right, yes. And it seems like people are taking steps before waiting to see what happens, at least in the case of Tazewell County, Virginia. They're a Second Amendment sanctuary, of course, but they're the first county to form a militia in response to the new proposed gun laws. And, militia, hopefully this militia isn't your usual 3%er blue line backing dumbasses. And they see what's going on here and can see the point that you just made, that these law enforcement are going to want to keep their paycheck. And so they're hopefully trying to protect against that eventuality as well.
Well, going off of what you said with it being a militia, that is even more difficult, I think, to actually figure out, because historically, militias have always been the citizen backup to the state National Guard against all enemies, foreign and domestic and all that. But based off my own experience and what everybody has seen and known, militias have become very much the people's version of my thin blue line and all that BS. Mm. So there's the possibility that they may just be like the standard Republican conservative, where they spout one thing and actually do another.
Right. And it was a county board meeting, too, where this was ordered. So,
well, counties in a lot of cases have always, or not always, but in a lot of cases, depending on the area, push back against even at the state level. So, like, even here in Maryland, as blue as this state is, like, there was that one sheriff on the Eastern Shore that says, not my county. So that is it being county at the county level for the firm militia does not surprise me. So it could go even more so apply to this. It could go either way.
Right.
It may start off in one way and go another, or they may actually be legit. Don't get me wrong. I hope they're legit, but historically speaking, especially in the last 10, 15 years or whatever, that's probably not going to be the case.
Right. So. Yeah, so I made the call. I stuck with the prediction that the Boogaloo kicks off in Virginia because of this, and I'm going out on a limb here because we know that people don't like to take action until they're set into really uncomfortable circumstances. I just put out a short article for the Counter Economist in which I used that famous line. Was it? Society's only a couple meals away from a complete breakdown, pretty much. If it gets to that case, once people lose their creature comforts, that's when things are probably going to happen. I've just been surprised by the amount of clapback, because it seems like every other state where this stuff is proposed or threatened, whatever, it just falls apart. Either it doesn't go through on the side of the government, or people are just like, yeah, whatever. Like, what was that? What was the county? Was it Boulder, the city of Boulder? I can't remember, where they instituted that tax. It was like $100 a day or something ridiculous on people who owned semi-automatic weapons, and people either left or just didn't pay them. And I haven't heard anything about that since then.
That's news to me.
Yeah, that was like a year
Talking about
ago.
Boulder, Colorado, right?
Yeah, it was like a year ago. It was a small. It's probably not a county. It was probably a city. I'd have to look that up later. I'll see if I can link something in the show description. But yeah, it takes a lot for people to take action, and that's what you're saying as well, and what we have to think about too, is that maybe nothing will happen. Maybe people will roll over and give away their guns. Hopefully they just leave if they're not going to actually take action against the state there. But I just hope that's not all wishful thinking.
Well, even just straight up leaving has its downsides too. A perfect example is California and the entire Southwest. Expatriate Californians for decades have been moving to places like Utah, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and have slowly been turning the entire region blue, because for some reason they're leaving their state for the socialist authoritarian policies that are basically turning California into a third world country. But then they're moving to the red states and turning these red states into the same fucked up area that they just left. So that has to be taken into consideration for people just straight up leaving too, because everyone has their own line where they draw in the sand on what they're willing to put up with. So
yeah, absolutely. I think another major misconception when we talk about Boogaloo and things happening out of Virginia, whatever, even looking back at the Whiskey Warrior thing that happened in New York not too long ago. There's a lot of really hopeful people, hopeful anarchists who say, if we do this could secure a better future. I'm still with the camp that changing culture is the only way to make a better future as far as anarchy is concerned. I think that the violence, Boogaloo, whatever, is going to be in response to either state overreach to the point where, like I said, we lose our regular comforts, or it's going to be at the point where culture has shifted so much that the state is lashing out in its death throes to try to survive. But the thing that I find to be the most, I don't want to say naive, but the most hopeful, and it's a false hope, is that any kind of Boogaloo is going to be majority anarchist. It's definitely not. There's a lot more people, I would imagine right-wing people that are down with Boogaloo as well, who are not anarchists. And there's people saying that, as an anarchist, I can't ally with anybody like that in the Boogaloo. Well, you're going to be a man standing alone then if you don't, squat up with people who don't share your beliefs.
And that is very true. Obviously, we all know, anarchists in general, or especially quote unquote legit anarchists, are very much a minority, to use a collective term. But in regards to the whole 3% militia thing, I remember after I got out, it was towards the end of Obama's second admin, and 3%ers, Tea Party, and all that were massively protesting and all that. And I was a participant also. I mean, I saw how bullshit Obama was and all that, and became a prepper and started talking to people and collecting things and all that. And then Trump came on stage for the 2016 election and started making all his noise. And then all those same people started talking about how wonderful he is and blah, blah, blah. And then once he was elected, all those same people that I was protesting with and all that were suddenly silent.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, here in Maryland, there's the Republican governor. He's done just enough good to keep people quiet. The only advantage is Virginia's got the Democratic governor, which may get a lot of those old 3% Tea Party people up in arms again. But with Trump still in office, a lot of those people are still going to be like, oh, it's okay, Trump's still in office.
Right, absolutely.
So I guess it just depends on, like we said before, down to the individual, what they're willing to put up with, or what, and with the whole anarchists have to, if they want to survive, possibly team up with somebody who's not one, due to just sheer numbers. That may or may not work because, like I said, Trump's in office. So just those people, the majority of those who are in militias and are gun owners and all that are those kinds of people, unfortunately. So who actually knows?
Sure. I think another major misconception with the concept of a Boogaloo is that it's going to be taking a fight to the government, like it's going to be another revolution trying to overthrow the government. I don't think that's what a Boogaloo would be, or, even if we don't want to use the term Boogaloo, because it's kind of a meme, obviously. I don't think that's what civil unrest, a collapse of any kind would be. I think it would be more of a fight for survival. And if there were a collapse on an economic level, if there was government destabilization, it would be government fighting to regain control. It would be people literally fighting just to live and then having to deal with the government trying to control areas that they're not going to be able to help in a major event. They're going to try to come back in and get more money and rebuild. It's not going to be this whole, we're storming the White House or anything like that.
Well, you got to look at it from both the political and a strategic military standpoint. From a strategic military standpoint, no pure self-defense is going to win. All it's going to do is prevent you up to a certain point for a certain amount of time from losing. If any kind of fighting does happen, it will start off as, like you said, in my opinion, a fight for survival in isolated pockets, possibly those Second Amendment sanctuary areas, possibly. But on the other hand, there are those who advocate for a peaceful cultural revolution, which is smart to a certain extent, because people can do homestead, self-educate, homeschool and all that, and resist. But the more we resist, the more the state and the feds are going to crack down and violently. So that can only be so effective. In my opinion, there's got to be some kind of combination of both in order just to survive, not even talking about causing or allowing for a collapse.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely. You got to build your change and be able to defend it is the thing. And I think that is actually the best possible outcome from large-scale Boogaloo collapse, whatever you want to call it. If things get destabilized enough, I think it's just completely outside of reality to think that and we're talking about at least the U.S., possibly the entire North American continent. If things were destabilized, government was gone offline for a while, because it would only be for a while, it wouldn't be forever. That's the misconception. We're not coming out of this as a continent in anarchy. We're going to come out with another government trying to form up. So the best possible outcome would be carving out your spot, building your community, and being able to defend it from whatever comes up next to live freely.
Well, that actually kind of boils down to, I can't remember who it was, but there's a concept called Panarchy. It's basically a self-sustaining, independent, non-state, regardless of what your geopolitical situation is surrounding you.
Yeah, that would be ideal. I know you're going to try to get something like that going wherever you go next. I don't want to put any location info.
That's a plan.
Out there. Yeah, that'd be good. I want people to come up here to, to the inland Northwest and start doing kind of the same thing. But it's like herding cats. You can't get everybody in one place.
Well, it's been a while since I've actually looked into it, but there's one of the survivalists that I actually got into back during my 3%er days called John Wesley Rawls. He's got a concept involving one of those self-sustaining society, whatever things out in the Pacific Northwest. I think it's like Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon. I just can't remember what it's called.
Idaho.
But from what I remember, he was a retired Army officer who resigned when Clinton was elected, and he became a survivalist after that. but from my understanding, he's still very much one of those Christian conservatives. So, and I haven't really read upon him or what he's into lately, so I don't know if that's even still a plan or not.
So, James Wesley Rawls, he's actually written one of my favorite books having to do with an economic collapse and survival. And I've mentioned it on the show here a few times, but I'm going to mention it again because I love it. It's called Patriots. It's by James Wesley Rawls. It's a great book, and his idea with the book was a survival manual that people would want to read cover to cover and learn the information. He wanted to deliver it in a way that people found interesting, so he wrote it in a novel style. And he's based, I believe, in the Palouse outside of Moscow, Idaho. The Palouse being farmland is what they call it. It's more level or rolling, I guess, but not a lot of forest. And so the idea that he brings forth, which I base a lot of what I think would happen on because it makes a lot of sense, is that it's pretty much what I said earlier. If there's an economic collapse or any other large-scale collapse, the government's going to be floundering. People are going to be left to take care of themselves. Not a lot of people are ready, prepped, even to a 3-day level, let alone a month level of food and whatnot in their house. So there's going to be massive, exodus of people outside of the cities to try to find a way to sustain themselves, looting, rioting, all that stuff. And government's just not going to be there. But when it gets its feet back under it, maybe with the help of the UN, who knows, because they might not have people that they can pay at the time, they're going to come back and try to reset what they had before. And his idea is he's hoping that a libertarian, I'm talking a big L libertarian government or small communities would come out of that. And I think that's even optimistic. But, it's a nice thing to look forward to.
Well, even with its defaults, Monarchy is still better than what we have. Obviously, it would not be an end result. It just would be better than what we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be better. It's what a lot of people say. I see when, because there's always fighting between minarchists and anarchists, big L libertarians, all that stuff. And something that I see a lot of people agree on is like, well, as long as we have something that we can opt out of, as long as it can be voluntary, that would be ideal. And I agree. That's, it's laid out in the New Libertarian Manifesto. Konkin lays that out. Statism's never going to go away. There's going to be pockets of statism. People want to have that. It's the willingness to prevent it from taking over your area, or the willingness or the ability to be able to get out of it.
Oh, that is extremely important, especially in more stricter states like a lot of the East Coast, is you just really have no choice. Like what I mentioned previously with the current Republican governor and the storm tax, I think it was about 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly. The former Democratic governor enacted what was called the storm tax. I don't remember the actual official name, but basically the point of it is to take extra money from the people and put it back into the infrastructure to repair after inclement weather. It obviously didn't work. Nobody had a fucking choice. We all had to pay it until the new governor revoked it, which it really hasn't done much and putting more money in our pockets. I think it's more of a, hey, this is what I did to help you out because I followed one of my campaign promises. However, my original point is something silly like that. We had no choice, and people elected him, and once elected, fucking politicians do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, exactly. There is no choice. It's hilarious too. The voters, even within the big L libertarians, who are still so set on voting, even if it's in what they call self-defense, which I think is bullshit. Another article I've written for the Counter Economist. You can go check that out. It's on Spooner and his non-defense of defensive voting. But voting for getting rid of tax laws, voting to get rid of this and that, it doesn't matter, because if people have the opportunity to do that and say they do, the government can still come in and veto whatever the legalese is to deny that from happening. For 85 years here in Washington, supposedly the voters have been voting down the idea of a state income tax. And in the last year, the legislation over on the west side has been considering doing a closed door vote of just state officials to pass it. And then not only that, they hide the taxes and everything else. You're paying the same amount, maybe a little less. It feels a little less, but you get higher taxes in food, fuel. Just to go, you have to get what they call a Discover Pass to go hiking, to go fishing anywhere on top of your regular licensing. That's your pass, so that you won't get ticketed for. I don't know if it would be considered trespassing or what, but if you don't have a Discover Pass in your truck, you're going to get fined by the wardens, whoever's out there.
So that's essentially a double license.
Mm-hmm.
Double
Absolutely.
Permission.
They're just
double
hiding
the bullshit
it anywhere else. They're hiding it anywhere else they can. They were super upset about there's a $30 car tab initiative to get your registration tabs out here. It's $100 to a few $100s for pretty much everybody if you ever update your tags. Your driver's license is expensive to get up here, all that stuff. And so a guy, he's an excellent troll. But he's also been trying to push through this idea of a straight $30 car tab for every car. And it passed and immediately then got thrown out. It passed as far as a vote, as far as a people's initiative. And they're like, nah, we're not doing that. We're going to lose too much money for our failed public transit. It just doesn't fucking work.
Well, one thing I've kind of already known about, but experienced more so, especially increasingly lately, is the whole, that's not supposed to happen. The government's not going to do that if the people say so regarding the specific issue or whatever. That's the law or whatever. And I keep trying to tell them, it doesn't matter what it says on paper, or what reality is. There's difference between what it's supposed to be and what actually happens.
Right. Circling back around to the gun laws and stuff in Virginia, I think I sent you an article. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but we know that there's gun bans and legislation trying to be passed everywhere, all over the place. But this one made a little bit more of a wave because of what it was targeting. And the title of the article, it came out December 12th, so just a couple days ago, is Georgia legislation bans common hunting and sporting guns. And that's another Democrat senator, Donzella James of Atlanta, has pre-filed legislation that would ban the possession of semi-automatic firearms. That's Senate Bill 281. And it says it would even ban common semi-automatic shotguns used for bird hunting and trap shooting. Any persons convicted under this new law shall be punished by imprisonment for a period of 5 years. So they're not even beating around the bush with this one, with the, we're going to tax people who are registered owners of these guns until they either have to leave, can't pay them and go to jail, or just turn in the guns. They're saying straight up 5 years in jail, and they'll take your guns.
Well, at least you can't say they're not being honest. We've noted the whole time what they've been doing, but now they're straight up saying what they're doing. But that being in Georgia, somewhat in Virginia, but I think more so in Georgia, I think if that actually passes, that might actually be more of a possibility of something happening to counter it, because that is destroying people's livelihoods.
Mm-hmm.
You have to doing that, and somebody following it to the letter of the law, you essentially create slaves. And I think that's the entire point of it. The entire point of it is to create somebody who will listen to you unconditionally.
Right.
But because that, like in Virginia and in Georgia, both those laws are hitting at people's basic form of obtaining substance or sustenance, in some cases, even in 2019, that's going to hurt them in the long run, hurt the people wanting the laws in the long run, because that's creating a lot of dissent at the rural level, where it's much more difficult to send in the National Guard or the police or whatever. So like going back to the Second Amendment sanctuary areas, a lot of those areas I'm pretty sure are the more rural counties and cities, and
right,
let's say Virginia. And if anything happens, those areas may be where it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is more difficult because it's more dangerous going door to door out there, I would imagine. Maybe not more dangerous, but it's more difficult out there. But the other thing that makes it easier for them is isolation and space between people. There's not really a whole lot of opportunity for people to squad up unless they're planning ahead. That's why creating your team, a community, people that watch out for each other, even just people near you that you can send a text message or something over an encrypted app to get out the message that they're coming for you. Once again, talking back about Whiskey Warrior, he went on Instagram, and we did a hot tokes about whether or not this is true. So if you're listening and you don't buy the Whiskey Warrior story, check out the hot tokes on that. But either way, for the point of this conversation, he went on Instagram Live and was talking about it and stuff and rallied a bunch of people that way. If he had had a solid network around him of a few people that he trusted who could get the word out and go and be there right then with at least the ability to film, if not help him, that would have made a world of difference, because the communications were dog shit in that whole situation.
I don't know all of what happened in that situation. I think you're the one that actually introduced me to what was going on, and that was already by the time it was like halfway over or some bullshit. What I personally do know 100% is that it seems like there was a very effective propaganda campaign by the local police to destroy his reputation.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I don't know all the details of what was going on, but going back to what you're saying, yeah, having something like that, like a network or an effective communication plan, would go a very long way. The issue with having a communication plan is everything's electronic these days. And when it comes to electronic encryption, it's not if the feds can break it, it's literally only when they can. Right. So that, in my personal opinion, effective communications is what's going to destroy any significant resistance in the long run, unless there is a means of countering that and it's developed. I just don't know how.
Sure. What would you consider to be good options outside of electronic communications? Because I know a lot of people are talking about ham radio, and they're cutting off the ability of some people to use ham radio in California, taking down towers on public land. They're removing those now that they've said they could keep there. Are we going to just burn tires? Are we going to turn it into Boogaloo and burn tires so they can see the smoke?
Going strictly on non-electronic means, that may unfortunately be the case. And that goes along with knowing your neighbors. Being in a good area where you can rely on your neighbors is very important. However, also extremely difficult now. But being in good terms with your neighbors, knowing older forms of communication, all that will help non-electronically. However, the United States, as we all know, obviously is a massive country, and electronic means, it's the modern world. That's the way to go, unfortunately. And that's also, it's the most effective, the easiest, and the most dangerous.
Right. That's another interesting chapter, actually, in that book, Patriots by James Wesley Rawls, is when he gets deep into radio communications. It was extremely technical, so it definitely was not interesting. It was probably the least interesting chapter in the book, other than the information that was actually there, and creating radios with custom channels so you're not riding the same waves as the people who are trying to listen to you. But that takes some in-depth knowledge.
Well, that's actually part of what I did in the military, was communications and related intelligence and all that. And I can tell you that short of having the means at the time and the money to develop something different, it goes back to what I said before. It's just a matter of time when it can be broken. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can learn effective radio communication techniques. You can even have your own electronics to help guard you, that, like with certain apps on their phones, they're encrypted. They help to a certain extent, but the feds have the money, the means, and the training and the amount of people to counter that. It's just a matter of when.
Right. I think the smartest plan of action would be to have and at least a small array of different types of communication available and be familiar with them. So you can switch if you need to. You can swap, whatever. But yeah, it's it's disheartening knowing what we're up against.
I mean, one can still use electronic means. You just have to be very careful in your language. Developing codes and alternative ways of saying things and slang and all that does work, just up to a certain extent. You can't forget that.
Right. Another thing about whether it's Virginia, Boogaloo, anywhere, any kind of boogie, is it's becoming a meme. This is the most disturbing thing to me. I mean, it's already a meme, but it's becoming a meme in the sense that Area 51, Epstein, all that stuff became a meme and just lives in that realm now rather than being taken seriously. That's what I think that was the major downfall of Area 51, was that it became just a nothing. It became a complete joke. And the Boogaloo memes are great, but there's some really good, I guess, critical memes of people who are interested in Boogaloo, making fun of not ever practicing with weapons, not getting in shape, not getting your preps ready. You're just LARPing at that point. And the thing that people like to post now is the Urban Dictionary definition of Boogie Boy, which is pretty much just a LARPer, someone that eats boogers and acts tough and doesn't actually do anything to back it up. And these people that are posting this stuff, it's a valid criticism because most people aren't getting ready in any way. They're not practicing, getting in shape. How important is that? There's been some actually hilarious memes. I think they're airsoft enthusiasts that are looking pretty big running around, and it's like, you don't want this to be your ass in the Boogaloo. You're gonna get turned into bacon. But that's stuff that needs to happen. I do find it hilarious that the people posting this aren't even going as far to think about being a boogie boy. So that's hilarious. It's a bit of projection there, but it's a valid criticism.
Oh, and I completely agree. And that goes back to what I personally saw in the end of the second Obama admin going into Trump's administration is all those people were ready to do something. Like, I remember being at the White House in October 2013 when the national parks and all that were closed during the sequestration and all that. However, those same exact people 3 years later were like, oh, Trump's God, blah, blah, blah. So as a result, I'm sure there's still some areas where they're like, oh, yeah, we're still going to prepare and whatever. But a lot of those same people are they're sucking on Trump's teat to the point where they're just not even at the same level as they were when Obama was president. Right.
Well, I like the idea of the page DIY Anarchy, which we know. And that's do it yourself. Get hashtag Boogaloo ready, figure it out, all that stuff. It needs to be not even centered around the Boogaloo. It's a lifestyle of being ready if you're a self-respecting anarchist in one way or another.
Well, that's also why I've done my group, which is now connected to the DIY Anarchy group, and that's the Free Market Environmentalism and Green Agorism. It's from a slightly different perspective as the DIY page, but it has the same concept in the sense of educate yourself, help educate other people, learn, grow your own stuff, become self-sustaining instead of having to rely on someone else's teat, especially by gunpoint, in order to survive.
Right. Yeah. I always come back to the fitness aspect of it too, which of course, your health and fitness is dependent on what you put into your body as far as food and whatnot. So gardening and learning all that is important. But ever since having Greg Papanikolaou on the show, the guy who does Project Sparta, great personal trainer, I've been working with him on his plan to get back in shape. Fallen out of shape doing different things. I went from field labor to office to running equipment to all kinds of different stuff, and it's insane how quickly you lose it. But with if you have the opportunity to go hiking, even just body weight workouts at home, endurance I think is probably the most important thing to cultivate if you want to have any chance in any sort of unrest. You're going to need a move.
Well, that I don't work out like I used to because I do have injuries from the military that have prevented me from being as physical as I used to really enjoy. But I have a very physical job. I think that helps me keep, my fitness in check and helps me still, despite not being able to have any formalized workout regimen. I mean, obviously, if I truly wanted to, I could put time aside and actually do it. But, I have the same problem a lot of people have, time prioritization. And like I said, my biggest silver lining is the fact I got a physical job. So, but going back to Greg, like with you and John doing the DIY page and me doing the other group, Greg's got his perspective on how to help people, and it's a different perspective, but it's got the same end result: prepare yourself, help yourself, and become more self-sustaining. And I think that's what everyone can agree on, is getting to that point and being able to keep at that level.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much that goes into being ready. And I think, obviously the internet's a trap. It's a dopamine trap. Turn off your fucking phones. You don't have to turn off this podcast. You can listen to the podcast while you're hiking, running, whatever you're doing, working out. But it's good to get out there and to do it yourself, man. Do it yourself anarchy. Yeah. You got anything else? Oh, that's one more thing I wanted to do before we wrap up. We're coming up close to time, but it was just one more thing that was a little. Oh yeah, first the bill tracking. I don't know why it's called bill tracking, but the 2020 session for January 2020 about this legislation in Virginia. There was a bill, and I'm going to link that in the article. I just wanted to let people know that's threatening the termination of public employees who don't enforce the law. I want to say that. But then we kind of got, for a little bit while we were talking before this episode, on the subject of other things that could cause potential Boogaloo or collapse in the U.S. And one of the things was the Trump administration, and it says Mexico is also seeking a meeting with the Trump administration in the U.S. to discuss designating cartels as terrorist organizations. And there's some good articles on this, and an opinion piece from the New York Times about Mexico's fast track towards a failed state. So having another country butted right up against the U.S. that we obviously do a lot of business with, a lot of people back and forth and stuff, that could devolve into a failed state, that is another good kickoff point.
Well, if I remember the article, I think it was some foreign minister in Mexico was talking to Trump and basically said, we want communication, not intervention. Because even they know, if we have a tendency, or I should say the federal government has a tendency to, once something is designated as terrorism, troops are follow. And it's already been said, brought up in multiple times, send troops in Mexico, cartels need to be defeated, and it's fucking up our country, blah, blah, blah. And Trump, I think it was Trump or somebody else, wants to designate the cartels in Mexico as terrorist organizations, and that's going to be a fucking disaster, not just for us but for Mexico as well. And that's going to cause even more tension that we have with Mexico than we already have. And obviously the cartels have presence all over the lower 48, but their presence, as you probably know, is the most concentrated in the Southwest. And designating cartels as terrorist organizations will likely result in some kind of military force being used, and it will turn the entire Southwest to a fucking war zone.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at how it is a fucking war zone in Mexico, with the way that the cartels and the military go back and forth, and the military aren't beating them all the time. They're getting their asses handed to them. And if that spills over into the U.S., you're absolutely right. It's just going to be a fucked up war zone. So on that note,
well,
sorry, go ahead.
No, to say is the actual border itself has been a war zone since the war on drugs started. I think it was the late 60s, but it will just expand from there if the whole terrorist organization bullshit happens. And like I said, the federales and the cartels have been in both cahoots with each other and in opposition for each other for the same amount of time. And a lot of Northwest Mexico has been what we've seen in just the Southwest border for us, and it will only get worse if something like that happens.
Sure.
And going back to things that have been previously said, the only true way to significantly mitigate a lot of that violence is not to legalize. That's bullshit. It's to decriminalize. And that will remove the profits or even prevent the profits from reaching the cartel's pockets, and they will slowly disintegrate, slowly collapse as a result.
Absolutely, yeah. Cutting them off at the knees with just weed turned them to heroin and meth and all that stuff. So if that can cut them off from their profits with weed, then it stands to reason that it can cut off their profits with whatever they choose next. You got to hit them in the wallet. And that, I'm not saying that it excuses them for, any of the atrocities that they've committed against innocent people, but there's a way to end it, and the way the state is handling it is not the way. But tell everybody your group again real quick in case they want to hop in there.
I'll provide the link afterwards, of course, but it's just free market environmentalism and green agorism.
Nice. Free market environmentalism and green agorism, linked to DIY Anarchy. Great pages to follow, great group to be in. Mike, thanks for coming on. That was fun. You're a wealth of knowledge as usual, and I'm sure we'll do it again at some point.
I appreciate coming back on, and would love to keep talking about it all.
Yep. We'll stay in touch. You all stay in touch too. Remember, total freedom, no exceptions. Get prepped for the boog. Get fit.
Zombie president, what anarchy! Zombie president,